Before we venture into this haunting tale from the turn of the century New Orleans, I want to connect with each of you joining us on this journey into darkness. Please take a moment to let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you settling in for an evening exploration of forgotten crimes, perhaps listening during a quiet afternoon? Or are you one of those brave souls who delves into these historical mysteries in the depths of night? Your engagement helps us understand our global community of truth seekers, and it reminds us that these buried stories continue to fascinate people across all continents and time zones. Our story begins with what seemed like nothing more than a minor administrative complaint filed with the New Orleans Harbor Commission on November 3, 1901. Harbor Inspector Marcel Thibodeau had received reports of unusual activity at a small bakery and cafe located on the banks of Bayou St. John, complaints that might ordinarily have been dismissed as the typical concerns of competing businesses or disgruntled neighbors. However, when Inspector Thibodeau arrived at the establishment known as Café de Frères, operated by the Beignets brothers, he discovered something that would shatter his faith in human nature and expose one of the most methodical and horrifying cases of serial murder and body disposal that New Orleans had ever witnessed. The café, housed in a weathered Creole cottage that sat on stilts above the murky waters of Bayou St. John, had been serving what locals considered the finest beignet and café au lait in the city for nearly 8 years. The building itself was typical of the structures that lined the bayou, a single-story cypress construction with a steep tin roof, wide galleries that extended over the water, and a small dock where patrons could arrive by pirogue or small boat. What Inspector Thibodeau discovered beneath the seemingly innocent floorboards of this beloved neighborhood establishment would reveal that the Beignets brothers had been disposing of their victims in ways that had fed the very waters that sustained their community's way of life. To understand how such unthinkable horrors could unfold in one of New Orleans' most picturesque and peaceful neighborhoods, we must first immerse ourselves in the unique world of 1901 New Orleans, particularly the area surrounding Bayou St. John, which served as both a transportation corridor and a cultural lifeline connecting the city to the vast wetlands of southeastern Louisiana. Bayou St. John, originally called Bayou Chupik by the local Choctaw Indians, had been used for centuries as a natural highway between Lake Pontchartrain and the higher ground where New Orleans was built. By 1901, the bayou had become a charming residential area where wealthy New Orleanians built summer homes and where a thriving community of fishermen, boat builders, and small business owners had created a unique enclave that felt worlds away from the bustling French Quarter just a few miles to the south. The New Orleans of 1901 was a city experiencing unprecedented growth and modernization, with a population approaching 350,000 people and an economy that was rapidly diversifying beyond its traditional reliance on cotton and sugar. The city had recently hosted the successful Pan American Exposition, which had showcased New Orleans to the world as a modern, progressive metropolis while simultaneously celebrating its unique cultural heritage. Electric streetcars now connected previously isolated neighborhoods, gas lighting was being replaced by electric illumination throughout the city, and new industries were establishing operations that would transform the economic landscape of the region. The Bayou St. John area in 1901 was home to approximately 3,000 residents, most of whom were middle-class professionals, skilled craftsmen, and small business owners who had been drawn to the area by its natural beauty and relative isolation from the noise and congestion of the central city. The community was remarkably diverse, including French Creoles whose families had lived in the area for generations, German and Irish immigrants who had prospered in various trades, and free people of color who had established successful businesses serving both the local community and visitors who came to enjoy the bayou's recreational opportunities. The physical environment of Bayou St. John played a crucial role in the events that would unfold. The bayou itself was a slow-moving waterway that meandered for several miles through cypress swamps and marshland before connecting with Lake Pontchartrain. The water was dark and murky, stained brown by tannins from the surrounding vegetation, and its depths were home to alligators, snapping turtles, and various species of fish that formed the basis of the local fishing industry. The banks of the bayou were lined with cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, creating an atmosphere of mysterious beauty that had inspired countless artists and writers but which also provided perfect concealment for activities that were better left hidden from public view. The tidal action from Lake Pontchartrain meant that the bayou's water level fluctuated throughout the day, and the current was strong enough to carry objects downstream toward the lake, where they would be dispersed into the vast expanse of water that connected to the Gulf of Mexico. This natural drainage system had been used for centuries to dispose of waste and unwanted materials, and the local wildlife was efficient at consuming organic matter that entered the water. These natural characteristics of the bayou would prove to be crucial elements in understanding how the Baudouin brothers were able to dispose of their victims' remains without detection for so many years. The building that housed Café de Frères was typical of the commercial structures that had been built along the bayou during the late 19th century, constructed in 1885 by a boat builder named L.C. Tran. The cypress cottage was designed to take advantage of the bayou's natural beauty while providing practical access to the water for both transportation and business purposes. The main floor of the building housed the café's dining room and kitchen, while a smaller upper level contained living quarters for the proprietors. Most significantly, the building's foundation consisted of cypress pilings that extended deep into the bayou's muddy bottom, creating a crawl space beneath the main floor that was accessible only by boat or by climbing down through a trap door in the kitchen floor. Into this idyllic setting came the Baudouin brothers, Anatole and Celestin, who would transform a beloved neighborhood gathering place into the center of a criminal enterprise that would claim at least 23 lives over a period of 8 years. The brothers had arrived in New Orleans in 1893, claiming to be refugees from the economic depression that had devastated rural Louisiana, though later investigations would reveal that their background was far more complex and sinister than they had initially claimed. Anatole Baudouin, the elder brother, was born in 1865 in what he claimed was a small farming community near Opelousas, though no records of his birth or early life were ever found in that area. He was a man of medium height and unremarkable appearance, with the weathered features and calloused hands of someone who had spent his life engaged in physical labor. His most distinctive characteristic was his voice, a soft, melodious tone that seemed inconsistent with his rough appearance and that had an almost hypnotic quality when he spoke at length. Anatole possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of Louisiana folklore, local history, and the traditional skills of hunting, fishing, and survival in the wetlands that surrounded New Orleans. Celestin Baudouin, 3 years younger than his brother, was taller and more physically imposing, with broad shoulders and powerful arms that reflected his work as the café's primary baker and cook. He had inherited the traditional skills of Creole cuisine from what he claimed was his grandmother, a renowned cook, who had worked in the kitchens of prominent New Orleans families before the Civil War. Celestin rarely spoke to customers, preferring to remain in the kitchen where he prepared the beignets, coffee, and simple meals that had made Café de Frères famous throughout the Bayou community. His culinary skills were exceptional, and he had developed several signature recipes that drew patrons from across the city. The brothers had purchased the Bayou property in 1893 with cash, paying the full asking price without negotiation and immediately beginning renovations that would transform the former boat builder's workshop into a charming café and gathering place. They had invested heavily in modern kitchen equipment, comfortable furnishings, and decorative elements that created an atmosphere of rustic elegance that perfectly captured the romantic appeal of Bayou life. The café's interior featured cypress paneling, wrought iron fixtures, and local artwork that celebrated the natural beauty and cultural heritage of the area. Café de Frères had opened in early 1894 and had quickly established itself as one of the most popular destinations along Bayou St. John. The brothers' beignets were legendary, light, airy pastries dusted with powdered sugar that seemed to melt in the mouth, accompanied by café au lait that was perfectly balanced between the strong chicory coffee favored by New Orleans natives and the rich milk that softened its intensity. The café also served simple meals featuring fresh seafood from the bayou and Lake Pontchartrain, prepared with traditional Creole seasonings and cooking techniques that reflected generations of culinary tradition. The success of Café de Frères was reflected not only in its financial prosperity but also in its role as a social center for the Bayou community. The café served as an informal meeting place where neighbors gathered to share news and gossip, where business deals were negotiated over coffee and beignets, and where visitors to the area could experience authentic Louisiana culture in a setting that felt both welcoming and exotic. Regular patrons included prominent residents of the Bayou area, fishermen and boat captains who worked the local waters, and tourists who had discovered the café through word of mouth or recommendations from hotel concierges in the French Quarter. The first indication that something might be amiss at Café de Frères came in the summer of 1900, when several regular patrons began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere and operations of the establishment. Dr. Émile Boudreau, a prominent physician who lived in a grand home on the banks of the bayou and who dined at the cafe regularly, later testified that he had become concerned about the increasing number of visitors to the area who seemed to disappear after spending time at the cafe. These were typically individuals who had come to the bayou seeking solitude or recreation, artists looking for inspiration, writers seeking quiet places to work, or simply tourists who wanted to experience the natural beauty of the Louisiana wetlands. The pattern was subtle and might have been attributed to the normal mobility of visitors and tourists, but Dr. Boudreau had begun to notice that these disappearances often involved individuals who had engaged in extended conversations with the Boudreau brothers and who had expressed interest in exploring the more remote areas of the bayou. He also observed that these visitors often appeared to be carrying valuable equipment, cameras, art supplies, or other items that would be attractive to thieves, and that they frequently mentioned their plans to explore alone or to camp in isolated areas where they were unlikely to encounter other people. Mrs. Celeste Tran, a wealthy widow who owned a summer home near the cafe, had also begun to notice disturbing patterns in the behavior of the Boudreau brothers. She later testified that Anatole had begun asking increasingly detailed questions about visitors to the area, showing particular interest in individuals who appeared to be traveling alone and who seemed to have limited connections to the local community. Mrs. Tran had also observed that certain visitors seemed to receive special attention from the brothers, being invited to stay after closing hours or being offered guided tours of the bayou that were not available to other patrons. The most disturbing observation came from Captain Jean-Baptiste Landry, a retired riverboat pilot who lived on a houseboat moored near the cafe. He reported that on several occasions during the night, he had heard unusual sounds coming from the area around Café de Frères, sounds that seemed inconsistent with normal business operations or residential activities. These sounds, which he described as heavy splashing and occasional muffled voices, had initially been dismissed as the normal activities of fishermen or other bayou residents, but Captain Landry had begun to suspect that something more sinister might be occurring. The investigation that would ultimately expose the Boudreau brothers' crimes began when Harbor Inspector Marcel Thibodeau received a complaint about unusual debris that had been washing up along the shores of Lake Pontchartrain. The complaint had been filed by several fishermen who had been finding what appeared to be personal belongings, clothing, shoes, and various items that seemed to belong to tourists or visitors rather than local residents. The fishermen were concerned that these items might indicate boating accidents or other mishaps that had not been reported to the authorities. Inspector Thibodeau was a conscientious public servant who had worked for the Harbor Commission for nearly 15 years, investigating everything from shipping violations to environmental concerns affecting the waterways around New Orleans. Marcel Thibodeau was a native of the Bayou country who had grown up fishing and hunting in the wetlands and who possessed an intimate knowledge of the natural patterns and rhythms of the local ecosystem. He was familiar with the normal types of debris that washed up along the lake shore and immediately recognized that the items being found were unusual in both their quantity and their apparent origin. When Inspector Thibodeau began his investigation, he quickly discovered that the debris was being carried downstream by the current of Bayou St. John, suggesting that its source was somewhere along the waterway rather than in the lake itself. He began a systematic survey of the bayou, starting at Lake Pontchartrain and working his way upstream, looking for any signs of unusual activity or sources of the mysterious debris. His investigation led him to the area around Café de Frères, where he noticed several details that aroused his suspicions. The first thing that caught Inspector Thibodeau's attention was the unusual number of personal belongings that seemed to accumulate around the pilings beneath the café. While it was normal for debris to collect around structures in the water, the items he observed seemed too valuable and too numerous to be explained by normal loss or disposal. He also noticed that the water around the café had an unusual clarity compared to other areas of the bayou, suggesting that something was disturbing the normal sediment patterns or affecting the local ecosystem. When Inspector Thibodeau approached the Boudreau brothers about his observations, he was struck by their defensive and evasive responses to his questions. Anatole claimed that the debris was the result of careless tourists who dropped or lost items while visiting the café, and that the brothers regularly cleaned up after inconsiderate visitors who left trash or personal belongings behind. However, when Inspector Thibodeau asked to examine the area beneath the café, the brothers became noticeably agitated and claimed that the space was used for storage and was too dangerous for visitors due to the presence of alligators and snapping turtles. Inspector Thibodeau's suspicions were further aroused when he noticed several details about the cafe's operations that seemed inconsistent with a normal restaurant business. That he observed that the brothers seemed to have an unusually detailed knowledge of their customers' personal affairs and travel plans, and that they showed particular interest in visitors who appeared to be traveling alone or who mentioned plans to explore remote areas of the bayou. He also noticed that certain customers seemed to receive special treatment, being invited to private areas of the cafe or being offered services that were not available to other patrons. The breakthrough in Inspector Thibodeau's investigation came when he decided to conduct a nighttime surveillance of the cafe, positioning himself in a concealed location where he could observe the brothers' activities after normal business hours. What he witnessed during the early morning hours of November 2, 1901, would provide the evidence needed to expose one of the most systematic and cold-blooded series of murders in New Orleans history. Inspector Thibodeau observed Anatole and Celestin Baudouin disposing of what appeared to be human remains through the trap door in the cafe's kitchen floor. The brothers worked with the efficiency of long practice, using ropes and pulleys to lower heavy bundles into the water beneath the building, where the current would carry them downstream toward Lake Pontchartrain. The inspector also observed that the brothers had constructed a sophisticated system for processing and disposing of their victims' belongings, sorting valuable items for later sale while disposing of identifying materials in the bayou's waters. The evidence that Inspector Thibodeau gathered during his surveillance led to a search warrant that was executed on November 3, 1901, revealing the full scope of the Baudouin brothers' criminal enterprise. The search of Café de Frères uncovered a hidden room beneath the main floor that had been specifically designed for murder and body disposal. The room contained equipment for restraining victims, tools for dismembering bodies, and a sophisticated system for feeding remains to the alligators and other predators that inhabited the bayou's waters. The investigation revealed that the Baudouin brothers had been systematically selecting victims from among their café patrons, targeting individuals who met specific criteria that made them ideal for their purposes. The victims were typically visitors to the New Orleans area who had limited local connections, possessed valuable items or significant amounts of cash, and were planning to explore remote areas of the bayou where their disappearance would be attributed to accidents or misadventure rather than foul play. The selection process was sophisticated and carefully planned. The brothers would engage potential victims in conversation during their visits to the cafe, gathering information about their travel plans, family situations, and financial resources. Visitors who appeared to be wealthy, isolated, and planning to venture into dangerous areas would be invited to return for special meals or guided tours that would provide opportunities for the brothers to act against them. The murder method employed by the Baudouin brothers was both efficient and virtually undetectable. Anatole, who possessed extensive knowledge of local plants and their properties, had developed a mixture of native Louisiana flora that could be added to food or drink to render victims unconscious without producing obvious symptoms of poisoning. The mixture, which included extracts from several plants that grew in the surrounding wetlands, would cause victims to lose consciousness gradually, creating the appearance of someone who had simply fallen asleep after a large meal or who was suffering from the effects of the humid climate. Once victims were unconscious, they would be moved to the hidden room beneath the cafe, where Celestin would complete the murder and begin the process of disposing of the bodies. The brothers had developed a system that took advantage of the bayou's natural ecosystem, using the alligators, snapping turtles, and other predators to dispose of organic remains while feeding valuable belongings to the current that would carry them downstream to Lake Pontchartrain, where they would be dispersed over a wide area and eventually wash up on distant shores. The investigation revealed that the Baudouin brothers had been operating their murderous enterprise for 8 years, during which time they had killed at least 23 people, though the actual number may have been significantly higher. The victims included artists, writers, photographers, naturalists, and tourists who had come to the bayou seeking inspiration, recreation, or simply a peaceful escape from city life. The systematic nature of the crimes, combined with the brothers' sophisticated methods for selecting victims and disposing of evidence, had allowed them to operate undetected for an extraordinarily long period. The financial motivation for the crimes was substantial, as the brothers had not only been profiting from their cafe operations but had also been systematically robbing their victims of cash, jewelry, cameras, art supplies, and other valuable items. The investigation revealed that the Baudouin brothers had accumulated wealth far beyond what could be explained by legitimate business income, including property investments in other parts of Louisiana and bank accounts that contained far more money than their cafe could have generated. The psychological analysis of the Baudouin brothers, conducted by Dr. Henri Beauregard and other medical experts, revealed individuals who had developed a complete disconnection from normal human empathy and who had come to view other people primarily as sources of profit and convenience. The brothers showed no remorse for their crimes and seemed genuinely surprised by the horror and revulsion that their actions provoked in others. They had created a private world in which murder and robbery were simply business practices, no different from any other aspect of their cafe operations. The arrest of the Baudouin brothers on November 4, 1901, created a sensation that extended far beyond New Orleans and attracted national attention. The case had all the elements that fascinated the public: a beloved neighborhood establishment revealed to be the center of a murder operation, innocent victims who had sought nothing more than a peaceful experience in nature, and a criminal enterprise that had operated in one of the city's most picturesque locations. Newspapers across America carried detailed accounts of the investigation, often focusing on the brothers' use of the bayou's natural ecosystem to dispose of their victims' remains. The trial, which began in March 1902, revealed the full extent of the brothers' crimes and provided disturbing insights into their methods and motivations. Prosecutors presented evidence that the Baudouin brothers had systematically murdered at least 23 people over an 8-year period, had robbed their victims of valuable possessions, and had used the natural environment of Bayou St. John to conceal their crimes. The physical evidence was overwhelming, including human remains found beneath the café, personal effects belonging to victims, and detailed records that the brothers had kept of their operations. The defense attempted to argue that the brothers were suffering from a form of environmental madness caused by their prolonged exposure to the isolation and mysterious atmosphere of the bayou. They claimed that the brothers' actions were the result of mental illness triggered by their immersion in an environment that was fundamentally hostile to human civilization, and that they should be treated as victims of their circumstances rather than as criminals. However, the systematic nature of their crimes, the sophisticated planning involved, and their apparent understanding of right and wrong made this defense impossible to sustain. The testimony of surviving witnesses provided chilling insights into the brothers' operations and the narrow escapes of potential victims who had somehow avoided becoming targets. Several patrons testified that they had been invited to special dinners or guided tours but had declined for various reasons, decisions that had likely saved their lives. Others described conversations with the brothers that, in retrospect, seemed designed to gather information about their vulnerability and suitability. As victims, the impact of the case on the Bayou St. John community was profound and long-lasting. The revelation that one of the area's most beloved gathering places had been the center of a murder operation created a crisis of confidence that took years to overcome. Many residents moved away from the bayou, unable to continue living in an area associated with such horrific crimes. The local tourism industry, which had been growing steadily as more people discovered the natural beauty of the bayou, was devastated as visitors became afraid to venture into areas that had previously been considered safe and welcoming. The convictions of both brothers on multiple counts of murder in the first degree resulted in death sentences that were carried out in July 1902. The executions, conducted by hanging at the Orleans Parish Prison, drew crowds of thousands and were covered extensively by the national press. The Baudouin brothers maintained their innocence even in their final moments, claiming that they had simply been protecting their business from troublesome customers and that the deaths had been accidental. The case had significant implications for law enforcement procedures and tourism safety throughout Louisiana and the broader South. The ease with which the Baudouin brothers had been able to operate undetected for so many years highlighted the need for better coordination between local authorities and the tourism industry, more systematic tracking of missing persons, and improved safety measures for individuals exploring remote natural areas. From a criminological perspective, the Baudouin case provided early insights into what would later be recognized as serial killing behavior in rural and wilderness settings. The brothers' systematic approach to victim selection, their sophisticated methods for disposing of evidence using natural processes, and their ability to maintain normal community relationships while committing horrific crimes would be studied by law enforcement professionals and criminal psychologists for decades to come. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of tourists and outdoor enthusiasts in an era before modern communication and emergency response systems. The victims of the Baudouin brothers were able to disappear without immediate detection because they were exploring remote areas where accidents and misadventures were common, and where the absence of an individual might not be noticed for days or weeks. The building that housed Café de Frères was demolished shortly after the trial, as no one was willing to operate a business in a location associated with such horrific crimes. The site remained vacant for many years before eventually being developed as a private residence, and today there is no visible reminder of the café that once stood there. However, the memory of the Baudouin brothers' crimes remains part of New Orleans folklore, often told as a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most beautiful and peaceful settings. The case of the Baudouin brothers serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind facades of hospitality and charm, and that the most dangerous predators are often those who present themselves as friendly guides and helpful neighbors. Their ability to operate undetected for 8 years in a close-knit community demonstrates how easily trust can be exploited and how difficult it can be to recognize systematic criminal behavior when it is disguised as legitimate business activity and community service. Today, as we continue to grapple with issues of tourist safety, environmental crime, and the vulnerability of individuals exploring remote natural areas, the case of the Baudouin brothers provides valuable lessons about the importance of maintaining communication with others when venturing into isolated areas, the need for systematic tracking of missing persons in tourist destinations, and the critical role that community awareness plays in preventing such crimes. As you reflect on this disturbing chapter in New Orleans history, I encourage you to share your thoughts about how communities can better protect visitors and outdoor enthusiasts while maintaining the openness and natural beauty that make places like Bayou St. John special. Have you ever encountered situations while traveling or exploring natural areas where something seemed off about local guides or establishments that claimed to offer special access or unique experiences? What safety measures do you think people should take when exploring remote areas or when dealing with individuals who seem unusually interested in their travel plans or personal circumstances? The story of the Baudouin brothers ultimately serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to vigilance, a reminder that we must balance our natural desire to trust local guides and explore beautiful natural areas with a healthy awareness of the potential dangers that can exist even in the most seemingly peaceful settings. In our modern world of adventure tourism and outdoor recreation, the specific vulnerabilities that made the Baudouin brothers' victims susceptible to their crimes may have evolved, but the fundamental human traits that predators exploit, trust, curiosity, and the desire for authentic experiences in nature, remain as relevant today as they were in 1901 Louisiana.